afternoon. I'm Alexandra Kletina, journalist of Kyiv Post. Today with us, Russian opposition leader Ilya Ponomarev. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
What is the situation with mobilization in Russia? Is the Kremlin succeeding in its mobilization plan?
Well, first of all, as it seems, they cannot reach the targets that they put for themselves, and they officially announced that they want to mobilize something like 300,000 people. I think that unofficial number is actually way larger than that, and I think that they were anticipating to recruit as much as 1 million people, but the official target is 300. But according to the statistics of the Ministry of Defense of Russia, some week ago, it was something like 225. And out of this 225, actually, a certain number was volunteers. They officially said that it's something like 70,000 volunteers altogether that were turning up since the beginning of the campaign. So it looks like the actual number that they managed to recruit is even lower.
Why is Putin's army shelling the Ukrainian critical infrastructure? What are the goals and logic of such attacks?
Well, I think the logic is pretty straightforward. I think that what Vladimir Putin wants is he wants Ukrainians to get tired of this war and to start pushing their own government to start negotiations on peace on Kremlin's terms, that they would give up their own territory and forget about the perished at the fields of war and would just say, okay, let's stop fighting and we cannot sustain this any longer, to put the country into depression. But reality, obviously, is that Ukrainians are not willing to do this. And each attack actually inspires more anger within the society, more outrage. And I think that he is reaching quite the opposite effect that he was hoping for. And frankly speaking, I do not understand, because if Vladimir Putin likes to boast how many historical books he read in his life, then he would understand that book at the example of London in 1940. The more Germans were bombing and shelling London, the more united British nation turned out to be. And even the other way around worked when Allied forces were literally demolishing German cities. That didn't result in any popular uprising of Germans against Hitler. So I think that his attempts are totally fruitless, but nevertheless, I think that he would keep trying for quite a while.
According to the latest polls by Levada Center, half of Russians believe that necessary to continue special operation in Ukraine, and the other half believe that peace negotiations should start. Will these opinions affect on Kremlin policy?
First of all, what I want to say is that sociological polls are quite contradictory within themselves, because on the question whether you support the so-called special operation, like 60% of Russians say, yes, we do support it, which, by the way, is already not 80% as it was before. So the numbers are falling quite significantly, but still the majority of Russians would reply that, yes, we support it. But with the next question to the same person, so do you think we need to start peace negotiations, or should we continue fighting? Some 20-25% of Russians say, yes, we should continue fighting. And some 50% say that we need to start negotiations. So that means that Russians basically do not know the answer, and they don't want to think about it. They understand that they cannot influence the outcome, that these are the decisions that are being taken at the high command by Putin personally, and they don't want to give the wrong answer to the pollster, because they are afraid that they may get prosecuted after that, and so on and so forth. So I think that the actual attitude of the population is they want to stay as far from this war as possible. And I think that this number of like 25-30% who support the war is actually more or less the accurate figure of how many like genuinely support the war.
But do you think Kremlin doesn't care about people's opinion, right?
No, they do care. They do care a lot. And Vladimir Putin always is very careful about the public opinion. The question is they care about the public opinion, but at the same time, they know that they can manipulate this opinion. They are doing their best with their propaganda tools to keep people agitated and mobilized and supportive. But that cannot last forever. And Putin understands. He is a type of a guy who understands Russians quite well, and he kind of feels where is this uncharted territory where he shouldn't go to. And when he was making the decision to actually start mobilization, I think that he had a clear understanding that it's a very risky move. But he has simply no other choice, because it's either the immediate defeat, or he may still try to implement the strategy of shelling Ukrainian civilians and try to persuade them to force the government to negotiate, or he can try to split the Western coalition around Ukraine and try to force them to push Ukrainians to negotiate. He's pulling all the strings at the moment. Elon Musk, Erdogan, everybody are trying to persuade Ukrainians to start negotiating.
Okay, so Putin's sharing Ukrainian infrastructure to force us to negotiate peace, right? In his logic.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what he thinks, because he needs to suspend fighting. He needs ceasefire. He needs to stabilize the front because he's losing, and his army is retreating. So he needs to buy some time to regroup, to reinforce, to fortify, and to start the counteroffensive.
In November, a Congress of Russian deputies in exile will be held in Poland. Has the Russian opposition begun to form alternative authorities that will lead after Putin's regime falls?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the first time in our history. It's like a parallel parliament being formed, and this parliament can form a transitional administration of Russia, and then it would be very much in the hands of firstly Ukraine and foreign nations to recognize it, and to recognize it as an alternative to Putin. But at the same time, it's also in the hands of this organization to efficiently form the armed resistance and start actually fighting against Putin. Currently, we have troops which are fighting alongside with Ukrainians in the front lines. It's a so-called Legion of Free Russia and some other regiments which are actively fighting. There is a growing partisan movement, but it's pretty obvious that it's all in the very early stage, and we need to make them grow tenfold to become really efficient. But to make them grow, it's resources. Resources come from the recognition. So we are at the beginning of this way, but I don't think that this way would be very long. I think that Putin just recently celebrated his 70th anniversary, and I think that that was actually his last birthday that he actually celebrated.
Good to hear. Ukraine recently recognized Chechen Republic of Ichkeria. What are the consequences for Russia would be in the future, in your opinion?
I think it's a very powerful signal. Ukraine, I think, in general, needs to take a proactive rather than reactive approach towards Russia. So Ukraine needs to become a player in Russian politics, and that's one of the very bold and important moves in this regards. Also, it puts Mr. Kadyrov in a very difficult situation, because his origin is from the resistance fighters in the Chechen resistance in the beginning of 2000s, in the end of 90s. He basically boasted that he achieved as much independence for Chechnya as possible. Now, a new move can be made, and it could be put on the next level. Whether Kadyrov would reposition himself to become a reactionary and would be seen by Chechens as a traitor, which would significantly decrease his influence in Chechnya, or vice versa, he would need to stand against Putin and say, okay, so now it's an opportunity for us to really claim our independence, and that would generate a split in the Russian upper circles. I think that Kadyrov for a while would pretend not to notice it, or would just joke about it and things like that. At the end of the day, this would not be able to be ignored, because I think that Ukraine just paves the way for others to do the same recognition, and I think there would be European countries which would follow the suit, and obviously that would start from the Baltic states and from Eastern Europeans. But at the end of the day, it would be a noticeable number of countries which recognize Chechnya's independence, and this process cannot be ignored.
Will Russian Federation fall apart in the future, and do you personally want it?
No, I hope not. I think that Russia falling apart would mean chaos, and I think that this chaos is not desired by no one. It would be no good for Ukrainians. It would be no good for Europeans. It would be no good for Americans. I think that everybody is actually willing to see a stable Russia, but democratic Russia. And I think that future Russia should be a part of the global community, and should work with other nations as a normal, civilized Western country. I dream about such future of Russia, and I personally would do everything possible to achieve it. And I think that the Congress that you just mentioned in Poland next month would be standing on the same position.
Okay, and my last question, what is the probability of military coup in Russia, and when will Putin die?
Military coup, I think, is not likely, because our military is very cowardish. Politically speaking, they are not brave people at all, and it's a result of a selection process that was taking part for ages. Even in Stalin's times, when there were real, brave commanders, heroes, recognized heroes, they also went to slaughter without a single word, as we remember. And right now, there are no such heroes. So here I doubt it. But I think that the split within the elites, which may result different type of coup, which would be made by not military but the civilians in the inner circle of Vladimir Putin, I think it's a very high probability. To make it happen, they need to feel the danger which is coming from below. They need to feel the spirit of the upcoming revolution, which would destroy them physically. And in this situation, they would start to act. But I think it's full steam ahead going in that direction.
Mhm. Okay, thank you for this interview, and have a good day.
Thanks for having me.